Oh, it now seems to say live on YouTube.
Okay, good.
Good to
So
go.
we'll call to order the Finance Committee meeting. It is 6:07 p.m. And the first order of business is the minutes. If the committee is in agreement, I'd like to consider tabling these minutes for review, for further review. There were some contextual things that I'd like to build into them, and I didn't have time to do that today.
I would like to table the minutes also. There's a few things
Okay.
I need to look at.
Great. So moved by Diana. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Colin. All those in favor of tabling the minutes from the September finance meeting?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm admitting somebody, Galaxy S10. I'm not sure.
It's Sherelle. I'm logging in with my phone. Yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna log off of this one.
Great.
So I don't know if Sherelle got captured there on the vote on the minutes. Because it was right as you were coming.
Sherelle, which do you vote in agreement?
I'm in agreement
Excellent. Okay.
with tabling.
Great, thanks. That's unanimous. So the next item of business is the update on reopening costs and the CRF grant application. And we are required to authorize to apply for the grant so that we can send that to the full board for the vote on Tuesday. So I'll let's go with it, Tom.
Okay, I'll start off and then ask Kristen to fill in some of the detail. I gave you a memo on this, and we also gave you several pages of documentation. The CRF grant application is due up at the state, and we have filed our document. The reopening, as we've discussed in the past, really consists of three major areas of funding that are available to us. One is the Esser Grant, which is a federal Esser Grant that came directly to the district in the amount of $2,084,000. Second is the state CRF grant, which is federal money that's passed through the state that was provided to the governor. The governor of each state was authorized to distribute those funds, and those funds are being made available to school districts to assist with reopening expenses, school reopening expenses for this fall. We had supplied, as part of the district reopening task force, and the finance subcommittee worked on developing those numbers and capturing all of the costs associated with reopening. And we had submitted a initial estimate to the state of our cost for reopening back in August. And actually, based on those submissions, the state then determined how much money was going to be made available for each school district. In our case, the state has awarded Norwalk $8,320,000. Really, in the last month, or actually the last several weeks, we've received additional information on this particular grant, which I'll get to in a moment, just to give you some background. And then the third major source of funding that we are anticipating using for our reopening expenses is the carryover funds from last year. And we have determined how much funding is available to be carried over. And it's our understanding that and the board authorized that carryover request at your last business meeting. And it's our understanding that the City Board of Estimate and Taxation will be taking up that request at their November meeting. And the amount of money that's available in carryover funds that would be available for reopening is $2,469,000. So in total, it's just under $12.9 million that is available. So now, just to go back to the CRF grant. Since August, we have learned some important additional details about this grant. First, we're obviously happy that the state awarded us what turned out to be the second highest allocation of any school district in Connecticut. But it has become clear as we get additional information. One, the funds that the state has awarded are for reopening expenses. So it's not to cover expenses that are unrelated to reopening, but for reopening expenses. It's also, the funds have been awarded in specific categories, and the state based those categories on what they felt were the highest priorities to allow school districts to reopen to in-person, in-student, in-building learning by students, and the areas that they felt would best support that. So they awarded the funds in categories of academic support, student support services, health, safety, and PPE, and transportation. We have since now learned that the state is put some fairly significant limits in terms of being able to transfer money across categories. So you can transfer money out of transportation into any of the other categories, but you can't transfer and then you can transfer between the personnel group of expenses and the non-personnel group of expenses within a category, but you can't otherwise transfer from, say, an academic bucket to a student support bucket, or from a student support bucket to a health and PPE bucket. So that does place some limitations on us because these budget estimates were put together rather early in the process, back in July and August. And as things have evolved and things have changed, some of our estimates have gone up and some of them have gone down. And so, ideally we would like to have been able to transfer more readily between categories, but the state has indicated, there's pretty strict limits on the transfers that can be allowed. The other thing that we learned, I guess it was probably in early October, when we learned that the funds must all be expended by December 31st of this year, 2020. And originally we had made the assumption that the funding would be, you'd be able to spend it through the end of the school year. And so that also has been a challenge, because our original budget estimates were all predicated on carrying costs through the entire school year. And we do know that a number of these costs are likely going to continue through the school year. In particular, the cost related to the staffing that we've brought on to, the paraprofessional, additional paraprofessionals we've brought on to staff the additional spaces that students have been spread out into in order to allow for social distancing. So that also added a, wrinkle of complexity. So what we have done, though, is we've now, done our best job we can to sort of balance all the expenses out, putting those expenses in those buckets that the state has authorized the funding for through December 30th, and then identifying other places to fund those ongoing expenses from either the Esser Grant or from the carryover funds. Now, the carryover funds are not technically in place yet. They still have to be approved by the Board of Estimate and Taxation, but we are assuming that that the Board of Estimate is going to act favorably on that request in November. So the detailed documentation we gave you really lists all of the expenses and breaks them out by the funding source, whether it's the 8 million CRF grant, the Esser grant, or the carryover funds, and it categorizes these expenses by the categories in particular that the state needs to see for the coronavirus relief fund So, we're pretty happy with where we've ended up. There is still a gap that you'll see on the bottom of the sheet of $682,000. And we are still working to identify ways to close that gap. There is some possibility that there will be potentially additional funding from the federal government that could be approved at some point during this school year. And we may have other places that we can look to. Some expenses may come in under estimates, but we did put on here a tentative preliminary option, if you will, that would be to consider scaling back the use of bus monitors. The budget that we originally put together did anticipate that bus monitors would continue for the entire school year on all buses. That was not one of the areas that the state appropriated a lot of money for. The amount, and it wasn't just for Norwalk, it was really across the board, that they were prioritizing the state funding in academics and not so much on transportation. So the transportation bucket that they provided to us was, I believe the number was about $247,000. Right. So it's not enough to carry that service through the whole year. So we're still, analyzing what the options are. I remain confident that overall that we can, work within the funding that's available to us in a way that will ultimately be what we, do what we need it to do in terms of providing the services to our students. But we did put that on there because that is, one option that is under consideration. So I want to turn it over to Kristen. Maybe Kristen, you can delve into some of the details. I don't know how far people want to go in. I don't think we need to go through, all 3 pages line by line, but maybe you can hit some of the highlights or categories, and maybe that would be
Sure. Do you want me to share a document, or would you like to just?
Oh, yes. You know what? I'm sorry.
I can share it too if you'd like.
I've got the whole agenda ready to share. Why don't I do that?
Okay. That might be helpful.
I apologize that was my oversight.
It makes it easier for the public also.
Yeah, absolutely.
For the public, and it's quite an eye chart.
I'm not sharing the right.
I've already committed it to memory.
You've memorized it?
I swear I had this ready to go.
It was very cleverly done.
No. Where is my, well, hold on. Now I'm having trouble finding it. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Got it?
Hold on. Yeah, I got it. Okay, sorry about that. I should have had that up from the beginning. Okay, so you want me to scroll to the details sheet here?
Sure. I don't know if you want to scroll back one to just show, to highlight the summary CRF categories, go up one.
Sure.
Because that's helpful to look at it that way, where you have the Esser Grant on top, like Tom said, for 2084, the new state coronavirus relief funds, or CRF as we're calling them, for 8.3 million, and then the anticipated carryover funds for almost 5 million, for a total of 12,874,000. And you could see on this sheet when it needs to be encumbered and spent by. And then obviously the state would like you to exhaust other measures such as your Esser grant before you use your CRF, but we're intending to use both grants. So we're okay on that, even though the spend by date expires first for CRF or Esser. Esser expires 9/30/2022, and the CRF grant expires 12/30 or 12/31/2020. CRF categories, as Tom mentioned, personnel related academic support, personnel-related student support, personnel-related transportation, which is the bus monitors essentially, and non-personnel related cleaning, PPE, health and safety in one category, which we have more than enough to spend in that area. We have even more than that. Our original intention was to move between the buckets, as Tom had mentioned, because we do have a lot of PPE, including filters and cleaning and other items that are more than that, but you'll see as we go through the detail that that's covered under carryover funding. The personnel related, the good thing there is it can be internal staff, or we spoke to the state, and it could also be contracted staff. So, you know, we're able to contract out some of those services because of the short time period. So criteria that was used here, I think I may be repeating some of what Tom said, but there may be other pieces. It had to be a necessary COVID expenditure. It had to be unbudgeted as of March 27th. And it obviously has to be incurred between March 1st and 12/30 and related to reopening. So the money was intended to be influx so we can, you know, reopen the schools and get as many kids in person as possible. We obviously have to gather a lot of documentation and submit it to the state with all the details in order to get the actual cash flow or reimbursement. So as we gather that and start to rack that up, there may be some moving pieces on these numbers. And to reiterate what Tom said, one of the options of the bus monitors may not be the option we go to plug the gap, because some of these numbers may change slightly. So Tom, do you want to go to the details? Perfect.
Sure.
There's a lot of details here, but just to ground everyone on how to read this. First column is the detailed expenditure item. The total expenditure we anticipate or budget that we think we're going to spend. It may not come out exactly like that, but we do have a 10% leeway within the grant when we file it. The type of expenditure, most of them are going to be reopening. There's a few other pieces there. The category that aligns with the 4 categories you just saw up top. The source is the funding source. Expenditure type is mostly going to be personnel wages or personnel contract service cost. And then our anticipated org object project number where we're going to charge it for tracking, but that may change slightly as well. That was just an initial estimate. And then the PCN, that means we're actually setting up a 1-year temporary position or a position that can be absorbed somewhere in the following year. So just
would it be, or Tom, would it be possible to maximize, to zoom in a little? It's very, very small on the screen.
Yeah, I don't know.
That looks good.
Better?
That's great. Thank you.
okay, great.
Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
So I'm not going to go over every single line item, but I'll kind of group them. So the first one that falls under the academic personnel wage category is the Jefferson Annex CISD, the salary and benefit costs, and that's only through the end of the year. So we thought that was a priority in order to manage that building. Reserve teacher salary and benefits. This is either a substitute or if we can hire a teacher where there's breakage in classrooms in order to maintain the social distancing. That should cover, depending if you hire a sub or a full-time teacher or a long-term sub, the cost may vary, but you know, we may get 2 or 3 out of that amount of money, and that's what we anticipated for breakage. Academic interventions in order to address learning loss due to COVID, personnel wages, that's $1 million. And the line under that, same idea, contracted services, we're now mapping out the details. So we'll come back at some point and provide more detail on that, but that's our high level estimate in those categories in order to, you know, give students the academic support they needed. 69 existing elementary school paras, additional hours up till December 30th. I think you've heard of this one before. It's the paras in order to have the social distancing in the classrooms and split the classrooms up. It's the hours taking the 27.5-hour paras up to I believe 35 hours in most cases.
Right.
Then we needed to hire an additional 17 brand new elementary school paras for the same reason, 211,000 there. And same idea for the next few categories, 7 middle school, high school paraeducators, additional hours, that was minimal. And then new, that wasn't a lot of money either. That was like 50,000. And then the associated Social Security and benefits go along with that. We do have at this point in time estimated learning pods that are being set up. So we needed 9 incremental paras for these learning pods at 35 hours a week. So we have their salary and benefits listed there. We have teacher hourly setup and other setup requirements. When we were trying to open school in the beginning, you know, teachers had their desks in different rooms and they had to unpack and move things around. So we wanted everyone to feel comfortable and set everything up for social distancing. So that's incremental money there and other minor requirements that they needed to do that. Summer school ESY program went over the budgeted amount we had, and that can potentially be put in the grant, the CRF grant for academic support. We have specialized learning, a few categories here, additional staffing for the 50-50 cohort for elementary, middle school, and high school. That is over 300,000 for that. We have IDEA makeup services. We have a contractual piece, which is academic, 175,000. And the reason this qualifies is because people during the springtime were being paid to do other jobs and we were paying their salaries and they weren't able to, you know, provide services to children face to face. And now we're able to do that. So essentially it was unbudgeted because the funding was used to pay those people for other things during that period of time per the governor. We have homebound academic interventions and other teaching where students cannot come in and they need help remotely. We're not allowed to send in our staff, so we have contract services for that. We have specialized learning building subs in order to help with academics. We have long-term substitute, the district-wide budget. This 75,000 is for the portion due to COVID FMLA paid leaves under the Act to replace teachers who are out due to COVID and other working conditions. Summer school, additional funds required, 563,000. We're still digging into that a little bit to see, you know, what pieces can potentially fall under the grant with that. So we may have to come back to you on that with some details. General PPE, health and safety, $100,000 there. We obviously have a lot more PPE we can put in here that doesn't show under the $8 million CRF fund, but we'll show that in another section. In what we were hoping is we can move more into this bucket, but it doesn't seem that the guidance from the state is letting us do that. We have a number of food service items, scanners, registers, tent rentals, carts, wristbands, that were appropriate under the health and safety category. We have isolation costs. One of the bigger costs in here is the HEPA filters and purifiers. As you know, that was 699,000. So that's a big chunk of the money, but that's obviously totally appropriate in order to help reopen for school. We have storage containers to move out the furniture to make more space for the children. Cleaning supplies, signage, hand washing stations, hand sanitizers, and ventilation, all appropriate. Nursing PPE, plexiglass for desks and tables, new desks for elementary schools in order to provide social distancing, partitions and dividers, other additional furniture. So that's all falling under the health and safety category. Then we jump back to student support. So here we have the Jefferson Annex is taking up a portion of this. In order to man that building, we needed a separate secretary, nurse, outsourced security, and custodians in order to manage that building with the proper student support. A large item on here is the SEL contracted services for $589,000. Students, as you know, during the pandemic need extra support, community support. They need trauma responsive learning environment, restorative practices. There's a number of things here that's being managed under the special education department. So we're putting measures into all schools, and we're working to get contracts out to have SEL supports for students so they're able to learn and be in a place where they can come back to school or learn remotely. We had extra police work for the first 4 days of school. Nurses needed to be fit tested for masks and other items that they were working with. Technology staffing. Obviously, we probably need even more of that with everyone having their own laptops and headphones and, you know, networks and Wi-Fi's and, you know, the gamut on that. So we probably even need more technology staffing than we have listed here. COVID impact intervention services, that falls under the special ed department, and that's $735,000. That's a big piece that we have in there. Summer evaluations, PPTs. So some of this summer learning qualifies because we needed to provide these services in order to get children ready to come back to school at that point in time. Special education has recommended, also related to SEL, that we provide 2 additional social workers within the middle school and high school up till December 30th. That's $92,000. CB trauma-informed consultation is in there. Special education, we have additional staffing related to other groupings such as speech, OT, PT, evals, external and internal. We had to break that up because obviously we don't have the bandwidth to do all of that internally. Additional IDEA makeup services, we had to contract some of that out as well for the same reason. The year-end deadline really, you know, had this whole process escalated where some of this is being provided or going to be provided after school, on Saturdays, before school. So we're really trying to get as much as we possibly can into this grant by the end of the year. Contact tracing for nurses and other operational staff. That was just a placeholder of 50. That could be higher or lower. Hopefully it's lower and we won't need that much there. We also have the 58 bus monitors for a point in time up until, I guess it's about now. They are going to be Norwalk Public Schools employees and on staff with us. So that's their payroll, Social Security and benefits. And then they're going to be outsourced and moved under the ESS contract. So the piece up to the grant amount is an additional $115,000. And obviously there's additional costs for bus monitors that's going to have to be carried and funded through the carryover or looked at again. So that exhausts the $8 million CRF funding, and the remainder of it we're potentially covering under carryover or Esser. I don't want to run through all these pieces again. It's the same idea of what was discussed above, except it's the other half of the year. So from January 1st through June 30th, those same pieces are going to be funded through the carryover, if you can see that. And then there's a few other additional categories there, such as academic supplies for $450,000 is listed in there. And the rest, I believe we spoke about up top. Then we flip to the Esser Grant, which is more of an educational academic based grant. And that's why in there we have the other half of the CISD's salary and benefits. We were able to put some of the Title I paraeducators salary and benefits in here. And that just reminds me to tell you, you may already know this, but the Esser Grant, the way we positioned it it's only to cover Title I schools. That has to be the focus there. So we have the other half of the Jefferson Annex nurses, custodians, security, etc., and some supplies. We also have microphones and teacher laptops, hardware, software, and the last item on there, $760,000, the repayment back to the city for the Title I technology hardware that the city purchased up front for us. So as you can see there, the total's 13 million, showing a shortfall of 682,000. And one of the gap closure recommendations was the bus monitors, but it doesn't mean that that's what it's going to be. We're going to scrub this and look for other measures. And also, as we get the expenditures in, maybe we won't need as much funding in other buckets as actuals come in and we process POs and people are punching their time. We may not, or we may not be able to provide all the services by December 30th.
Okay, so I don't know if there's any questions on this. In terms of the action we're looking for is to approve the coronavirus relief grant submission as presented, and then authorize the superintendent to execute any and all documents necessary relative to the CRF grant. So.
Great. So we need a motion and then we can have discussion. So can I have a motion to authorize the CRF grant?
So moved.
By Sherelle and seconded?
I'll second.
From Colin. Great. Okay. So do we have any questions or discussion from the committee? To my, to my review, it seemed like a very artful game of Tetris to meet all of the guidelines and find a way to meet our needs and qualify for the maximum amount of funding. So I really want to thank the folks who worked on it, Kristen and Nina and Tom, for making sure that we are able to leverage the most funding possible and provide the best reopening experience to our community that we can. I know that the feedback from many folks in the district has been incredibly positive, and I'm also hearing that in comparison to other communities in the state, we are having one of the best of worst possible scenarios that we're comparing favorably with what's being offered in other districts. So with that, is there anything that anyone wants to discuss about any item in particular, or are we ready to move to a vote?
Barbara, I do have one quick question. So if we scale back the bus monitors, and I believe the current count is 58, are the kids socially distanced enough that we don't have to worry about the monitors on the bus?
Well, I mean, I think the answer to that is, we don't know with certainty what might happen if the bus monitors aren't there, which is why we're, have some concern about this proposal. But certainly the thinking was that as students kind of get acclimated and used to the idea of needing to be socially distanced on the bus and in the school buildings, and when they get into a routine of this is the way they do it, and they do this consistently every day, day in and day out, that the need for a constant presence on every single bus, every single day may start to scale back. I've heard some instances where we know that there are some buses that are running with pretty small numbers because parents are taking their children to school. And of course, the buses are already going to be operating at reduced capacity at the middle school and high school levels because of the fact that we're in a hybrid model for those levels anyway. So there may be a way to look at this in a little more refined way and say, maybe at some point during the school year, it may be possible to scale back without saying we need to, or we ought to eliminate them entirely. So, you know, perhaps you could come up with a scenario that said, we're going to look at those buses that are the most crowded, that have the most number of students, and say that maybe those buses should keep the bus monitors. Or maybe you might say, well, we want to have some kind of rotating presence. So maybe it's not every single bus every day, but maybe it's on some kind of basis where, you know, you can still have some bus monitors in place for a number of the routes. So I think we're kind of exploring all of those options. It is one of the, you know, more expensive items that is, you know, is in the budget overall. And it is not one of the areas that the state has identified that they're going to, you know, fund for the entire year. So that's why it was put on this list. But I, you know, I do know the superintendent is, you know, would love nothing better than to keep the bus monitors in place as long as we can, and ideally for the whole year. But the question is there going to be enough money to do that? And, you know, and we're still sort of evaluating that.
I think there's also, you know, some possibility that we could see a second wave of funding through the federal government. There was another bill introduced yesterday. You know, so we don't, it's impossible to know what's going to happen from the federal level. But I do think the discussions are ongoing, and we could see funding that's targeted towards that post-January period.
So I guess where we're kind of leaving this is a bit of an open issue for us, is really what it comes down to. Is you know, there's not been a decision made to discontinue bus monitors. So even though it, you know, I think we overstated the case when we said recommendation. I think it probably should have just said gap closure option or something like that.
No. I understood what you meant. I just needed to ask the question. Quickly, and if you don't know, I can always follow up with Dr. Estrella. The limit, do we have a limit as to the amount of children that we're allowing on the buses?
Yes, I'm, you know, I can't quote the details, but I believe it's a requirement that it's one student per seat, and I think they have to be alternating every other seat or something like that. Maybe Barbara might know the details. I just don't remember the, you know, the exact details of. But I'm quite certain it is that the buses are operating at a reduced capacity.
I think, Sherelle, it's worthy of follow-up to ask Durham Bus Company and Johanna Zanvetter to update us as to what the capacity is on those runs, so that we have an understanding as we consider this.
Got it.
So I think that's a good question to follow up on.
And I do know that the students are all required to wear masks on the bus as well. So.
Okay, thank you.
It was very heartening to hear that the health department considered that the schools were not in any way related to this most recent uptick in cases locally. I think that's very encouraging that our procedures continue to be safe. Okay, so all those in favor of authorizing this CRF grant? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I think that's unanimous. Thank you so much to everybody for your hard work on this item. So I think we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Alliance Building Construction Grant, which is a lovely windfall.
Right. Yeah, this one was came a bit out of, we had not seen this one coming, frankly. I hadn't received any notification that this grant would be made available until we got the actual grant application package from the state in early October, or maybe it was September. But in any event, this is a grant that has existed for several years. If you were on the board a number of years ago, you may remember it, but it has not been funded for, I think, about 2 years. So I think we last received funding maybe 3 years ago, and I believe we got 2 separate rounds of funding in the past. And we did get notification that a new round of funding is being made available. And this particular grant is called the General Improvements to Alliance District School Building Grant Program. And the intention of the grant really was to fund building improvement projects that are not otherwise eligible for funding under the state's regular school construction program. And so the genesis for this really was that the school construction program is really designed for, these much bigger projects, renovation as new type projects, or alteration and addition projects, similar to the Jefferson renovation project that is moving forward, or the Ponus projects that just finished, and so on. But the state recognized that they didn't really have a program in place to support things that are, of a more maintenance, but still, somewhat costly items, and that the alliance districts in particular generally don't have the resources or enough resources in their communities to support these kinds of projects. So the grant is intended to fund things like boilers and other HVAC components, replacing internal communication and technology systems, replacing lockers, cafeteria equipment, replacing ceilings and floor coverings, upgrading restrooms, upgrading lighting and energy efficiency projects, upgrading driveways and entranceways, and upgrading equipment. We subsequently have had some discussion with the state and understand, although they didn't include this in the application package that they sent out, that they have a particular interest in helping support districts with HVAC improvements in this particular round. And we just found that out actually this week, or yesterday, or Monday, I guess, that, with the discussion, they indicated that that was a particular focus. But in any event, we have identified, so the total amount of money that's available, there's, I guess, 33 districts in the state that are eligible for funding. And Norwalk is in group 2, which is districts with at least 5,000 students, but less than 15,000 students. And these districts are eligible for $1,080,000. So we have identified some projects, and we provided you with a list of the projects that were put together by the facilities department. And we also had some earlier discussions with some of the schools over some of their requests. And so we provided you, that was the list of total potential projects totaling 2.2 million. And then I picked 3 of them. I did end up reducing the contingency amounts by 1/2 on the 3 projects that were recommended, just to make it balance out to the available funding. I would recommend that you authorize additional projects on the list as alternates in the event that for some reason the state turns down any of the items that we put on here. Now, we think that all the items that are on here qualify, which are the boiler replacement at Fox Run, the Nathan Hale bathroom upgrades, and the Roten locker replacements. But based on this guidance that was not anywhere in the written document from the state, but this verbal guidance that they're particularly interested in the HVAC projects, I asked facilities for whether there were any other HVAC type projects that we ought to consider. And let me just, I'll share that list with you as well here for just a moment here. So what they've come up, there were some, whoops, sorry about that. Can you see this?
Yep.
Okay, so they identified some additional items from facilities, BMS, building management system upgrades, and replacing exhaust fans. It doesn't total the full amount, but I guess if you approved a list and that had the items that totaled $1,080,000 and then just indicated that the entire list would be alternates, that might be the best way to go, just in the event that if the state comes back and tells us, look, for this round of funding, the only thing we're approving is HVAC type work. And I'm thinking, although I personally did not have any discussion with them, I'm thinking that they may be thinking about ventilation issues, particularly relative to COVID, maybe what their focus is. So that was where facilities came up with these additional BMS projects that would allow, the BMS systems to better regulate ventilation and fresh air intake and so on. So,
so I'm curious, Tom, the list that we received that has a full 2.4 million of possible projects.
Yeah.
But then only 3 projects made the final cut.
Yeah, let me bring that list back up again, just so we've got it in front of us here. That's
can you kind of help us understand the thinking of why these projects in particular were prioritized?
Sure. So obviously with $1,080,000, you're not, you can only go so far, but the boiler replacement projects were the highest priority from the facilities director. He's indicated that those boilers, both the Fox Run and the Wolf Pit boilers, are original to those buildings, which go back to, the late 50s or early 60s, essentially. And they are subject to fairly frequent, breakdown and need for maintenance work on them. And so the facilities director was, focused on boiler replacements. The discussions I had with the superintendent and with the also with Frank Costanzo, Dr. Costanzo, was that although we certainly understand boilers are important, and obviously, if a boiler breaks down and can't be repaired, it's something that would have to be fixed as an emergency, and replaced as an emergency, because if you don't have a boiler in the middle of winter, obviously, you can't operate school without heat in the building. So it's not that it's not important, but by the same token, it's not a project that has sort of the public face, if you will, to it. It's really behind the scenes infrastructure. And so we felt it was important that there be some projects in here that the school communities, could sort of get behind and feel that, that these are projects that are really important for our, for our school and how, how our school operates. And we know that the bathrooms at many of the schools, not only Nathan Hale, but many of the schools, the bathrooms are really, in many cases, really quite atrocious. They've been identified in the Silver Petroselli report. I'm glad to see that they did do some refurbishment work on the bathrooms at Ponus. And that was really the genesis for coming up with the idea that, could we do something similar for one of the other middle schools? And Nathan Hale is not a school that's had a lot of resources that have been put into that building. We have done some work at West Rocks, although not on the bathrooms, and there's still plenty of other work that needs to be done at West Rocks. But we felt that Nathan Hale bathrooms was a high priority item, a high visibility item, and so that's why that one made the list. And then lastly, on the Rhoton School, Rhoton had identified a number of items that they felt were high priority for their school. Their SGC, this really goes back to last year. They had a SGC meeting. They asked myself and Bill Hodel and Dr. Costanzo and a number of other people to attend the SGC meeting in December at Rhoton. And they had come up with really a laundry list of needs. We toured the building with them. And certainly, like many of our buildings, there are a number of things about that building that need work, including some of the bathrooms, including floor tiles. But they had identified the lockers as their highest priority, and so that was why we settled upon that recommendation there. Obviously, the committee, the board. Could come up with other recommendations that you feel are higher priority than any one of these projects, and that certainly is within your purview to do that. And we're bringing it to the Finance Committee, by the way, because the deadline for this application is. In one place it says it's October 23rd, and another place it says it's October 31st. But in any event, the application needs to be submitted in the month of October. And so, and it also does indicate that this needs to be approved by the board. And so we need to get this to the October board agenda. So, time is pretty much of the essence. But if there are, because otherwise we would have said, well, let's take this maybe to finance and facilities, but there isn't, facilities doesn't meet until the last Wednesday of the month. So that will be after the October board meeting. So if there are going to be any changes here, I would certainly recommend that you have some, sidebar discussions, perhaps with other members of the board and try to, get this worked out in time so that it can be approved at the October 20th board meeting. But, if the board feels there are other, or the committee feels there's other projects that we ought to either add to the list or substitute that are already on the list but aren't on the recommended column, we can certainly do that. So,
does anyone from the committee have any questions or comments?
Barbara, I do have one, and maybe I missed something, but I heard mention of the Rhoton lockers. Do we have any plans to work on the Ponus Ridge lockers? Did we come up with funding for that?
They were refurbished this summer, I think.
Yeah, they were refurbished, and and that is one of the issues that we talked about is refurbishment versus replacement. Refurbishment is much less expensive. Certainly, the Ponus lockers were refurbished, and it's my understanding that the Nathan Hale lockers were refurbished as part of one of the earlier Alliance Building Grant applications. I don't believe anything has been done to the West Rocks lockers that I'm aware of. The folks at Rhoton, did make a strong case that they were the existing lockers are very narrow at Rhoton, and I can't say with certainty if they're any different at any of the other middle schools or not, but they make the argument that the lockers are too narrow to get a backpack in. So that's why they made the push for replacement back when they met with us back in December. Now, with that said, you could conclude, you know what, we can only, do a refurbishment. We'll refurbish them, and that's all we can do. So, how you want to proceed, I guess, really is up to you.
But the refurbishment, that wouldn't help with the width.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the refurbishment, one of the problems with many of these lockers is they don't open and shut correctly, and the locks don't work, and so forth. So the refurbishment addresses those issues, and in some cases they're bent out of shape, and so they may replace a handful of them or have them professionally straightened. I don't know, but it is not the same thing as replacing them, because they're the same size. So.
And interestingly, the lockers at West Rocks are, I think, the same dimensions and have the same challenge. So just sort of reflecting on the conversation that we had last month about our repair budgets, and the fact that we have, we didn't receive a replenishment for our capital repair account, and we're sitting, I think you said $26,000 maybe.
Right.
It may be that the boiler replacements should be our top priority, because that prevents a large surprise expenditure mid-year. Knowing that we would then probably need some kind of a special appropriation or something, because we don't have a lot of repair funds budgeted this year. So while that isn't very, as you say, attractive to the community, in some ways, because this money is allocated from the state and we don't have to advocate for it, we don't therefore need community support for it, it may be a wise investment to consider that sort of large ticket, unattractive situation. And I know with the oil tanks, we are legally required to replace them, but with the boilers, we're allowed to keep our original boiler for, it's like 40 years.
Right.
Yeah. Like wasn't Wolf built in the 50s or 60s? So that's like 70 years, 60 or 70 years. Right?
Yeah. So, these, as far as I know, there's no legal requirement that you swap out your boilers, but at some point they, presume, I guess they last a long time. Certainly it's a big, metal component, piece of iron or whatever it is, steel, I guess. But, at some point, I guess they wear out, or at least the efficiency of them must, decline, and they become obsolete, really. So.
And then the other thing that occurs to me, the board has had multiple conversations about trying to ensure sort of parity between the buildings. So if we choose a project, it might make sense to do the same project at multiple schools and to the same standard, so that those, as you say, those community-driven, desirable projects are seen to be done for everyone. So whether that's, we redid Ponus restrooms this summer. If we did, say, West Rocks, Roten, and Nathan Hale, that would have some symmetry to it and some signal sort of our effort to be equitable in our allocation of funding. So, it may be because I'm the youngest of 5, but I really do like to think about fairness in everything that we do. And so, whether it's doing both the boilers or doing 3 schools bathrooms or doing 2 schools lockers or what have you, that to me would feel like it sends the right signal to the community. But I don't know how the committee, does anyone on the committee want to discourse now, or we can?
Well, I just say, I think the challenge is we're trying to get to that 1 million A. Is that right, Tom?
Yes.
And I don't know if we can get each boiler down to 540. To me, my thinking is if the boilers are perhaps the most, they're not the sexy thing, but they're probably the most important here. And if we can get them done, that would be my preference, is to have the boilers at Fox Run and Wolf Pit done. But I think it's a good list if we get any pushback from the state of alternate projects we could potentially do, especially if there was feedback from the building leaders on what was a priority.
It's also possible that we could realize energy efficiency from new boilers, and that we could therefore make some savings in the operating that we could dedicate to rounding out the cost.
Barbara, can I say something since I have to run to the focus group? I think also we have to keep in mind that the boilers are different ages. So there might be a reason why Wolf Pit is not on that list, and they chose to do Fox Run just by the timing of things. Maybe it has a little bit more life left. And also the fact that I know that they've been walking the buildings, and the SGCs have had their say in this in the short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we can make changes like that so quickly to have it out ready for the board to vote. And I don't want to diminish anybody's time that they took to look at these projects.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, that's my thing.
Agreed. So I think for the sake of our official work, what would make sense would be for us to move to approve, and then any further discussions, particularly with the members of the facilities committee, we could have between now and Tuesday when we need to finalize. Does that sound like a good course of action for folks?
Yes.
Me? Yeah.
Okay. So do I have a motion to approve this Alliance Building Construction Grant as it stands, to move it forward to the full board for approval?
I do.
So moved by Diana, second by Colin. Okay. All those in favor of approving this project as it stands, say aye.
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 Aye. Okay. That's unanimous. Sherelle, did you say?
Aye.
Okay, good. Okay, so and Tom, I think what we'll do is just discuss it and let you know if there's any sentiment to alter it all.
Yeah, if you need us to get cost estimates on any projects that aren't on here, certainly get that back to us, and we'll do everything we can to get those cost estimates together for you, so that
that's great. I think for the sake of parity and symmetry, it would be helpful to know the date on the Wolf Pit boiler and the Fox Run boiler, and the facilities team's estimation of their effectiveness. And then it would be useful to us, I think, to know, are the restrooms at Roten and West Rocks also a priority? I hear about the lockers, and especially now that every student has a Chromebook that they might need to put in their locker while they're doing an after-school activity or something. I think the lockers are an absolutely worthy project, but perhaps we could consider doing the lockers at more than one school or something.
right.
Yeah.
For this year, as I understand it, they're not using the lockers actually anyway because of COVID concerns, but presumably at some point students will be back to using lockers. So.
Okay, great. Diana, you have to take off. Yeah. Thank you for everything. I see that Yvette is here, which is great.
Yvette, our guest speaker for the budget transfers.
Excellent. Thank you so much for popping in, Yvette. So I guess we can move on to item number 5 on the budget, which is the budget transfers.
Okay, Kristen, you want to talk about these,
Sure.
and we can focus on the special ed one since we do have a vet here, I guess.
Most of the transfers are actually special ed, and I'll let Yvette talk to it in more detail. But like we had mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot of cleanup that needs to happen, and it's not really cleanup. It's when we budget, we don't necessarily have all the information to know all of the locations. So we do budget a lot of the positions in special education in 56 project, knowing that we're going to have to do this. We usually do it throughout the year or towards the end of the year. But this year, since Joe Nicolia in finance does this work, he had done it up front. So we're doing it early in the year with the help of the team, and Yvette can talk further to that, but I'll just start at the top. The reason certain ones are bolded is because those are isolated, specific reasons throughout the budget transfers, but the unbolded ones kind of are grouped together for that very reason. The first one we have on there, this is special education as well. It's moving funding from a contract service 330 account to in-house staff to hire 2 OTs and 2 CODAs. So we needed to move the money from 330 to a 145 and a 122 and a benefit account. So that takes 291,000 worth there, and that's bringing the services in-house. The next large transfer is also special education, and this has to do with changing student needs and moving the services to ABA type positions from regular paraeducator positions. So that's just the accounting, taking it from the 122 and putting it in the 56 project code, because that's where we do account for most of the ABAs due to the transient nature. The third one on here.
If I could there, Kristen. So we kept the same number of paras, but as the needs of the students changed and the IEPs required RBT level of services, and we have trained and certified our staff, there is an associated cost with moving them from part-time staff to full-time staff with benefits. So we looked at that cost, took the positions and moved it in to cover the positions and the benefits in that area.
Okay, the third one on here, this is with the EFS reporting, they want more detail on the location. So what we're doing now, so we don't have to manually do it at the end of the year in EFS, is we're breaking out any costs related to project search and the transition program. So project search is project 10. So that's really what that's doing there. And then at some point during the year, you may see project transition costs moving out as well. The next budget transfer has to do with, it's just a budget correction. It should have been always, this position should have always been split 50-50 with NARAMAC, the NARAMAC teacher versus the NARAMAC budget, and then 50% of the special education budget. So that's just really a budget correction. And then probably the next few pages worth of transfers, I don't know if I want to kick this back to Yvette, has to do with what I just spoke about earlier. When we budget, most of what we budget is in the 56. When we don't know the locations due to IEPs, we haven't gotten that far yet. So I'll let you talk to that, Yvette.
Sure. So we know how many paras we need based upon IEP needs and our formula that we developed 2 years ago to stabilize the para assignments. But when we do budget initially in January, February, we put any anticipated need that we're budgeting for into a bucket called 56, which is central office. As we then make the assignments, we then pull it out of that bucket and put it into the correct location code. So for example, if we know that 5 children are leaving NECC, going to a variety of elementary schools, but we haven't completed the annual review process yet, or parents haven't completed registration, we'll put those 5 positions into the holding bucket, knowing we're going to need them and then move them to the correct location codes as the staff and the PCN follows the child. And these are all pages of that. So you'll see something that may have been in a middle school is now charged to one of the two high schools because
Right.
the child has moved, the para has moved, and the funding now follows. So these are all opening conditions, corrections that now have the funding and the personnel in the same location codes for accounting purposes and accountability purposes. So without going line by line, in summary, that's what it is.
So
Thanks,
if you,
Yvette, for that.
I can scroll through.
yeah, anything that's not bold is that same exact idea.
So I think Barbara asked for an updated list of staff members, special ed staff assigned by school location, which I guess you last provided a list like that
In June.
June 9th, yeah.
In June.
And it was incredibly helpful to visualize our allocations. And I think just if we, now that we have gone through all those evaluations and IEP, updates, and we know where we stand, I think it'd be helpful for the board to see what that looks like, especially as we shift into considering the next budget cycle and what's needed to make all of this work.
Barbara, those are live documents that get updated virtually or in person on a weekly and sometimes daily basis. That master list will include staff from all funding sources, whereas this is looking specifically at the general fund. So there'll be more people on our master lists than would be accounted for in these transfers, but that is immediately available and available in live time on an ongoing basis.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yep.
So
that list
you'll
will
take
have-
care of sending that out, I guess, to, I don't know whether it should go to all the board members, but some members may want to see that before this goes to the board since these transfers are going to the board, they could ask about that at the board meeting possibly.
Exactly. I think it helps translate, what this is about.
The only thing we would need to do is hide the column with kids' names in it for the paras for confidentiality purposes, but it's immediately available and you can have it tomorrow.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Yvette. That's really helpful.
Okay, now there are some non
Yep.
special ed transfers here, it looks like, as well.
There's a handful of those, the bold. So this next piece is to shift funds in order to facilitate reopening. The second one down, the bolded one, in the Cranberry Elementary School. So what they had done there is they had to take some of their paras and cover alternative sections of the AB classroom. So this money here is taking the funds out of professional development, the 102 account, and moving it to cover 4 additional recess monitors. So they can help cover some of the duties of those other paras. The next line has to do with PTEC, and they could not fill the literacy coach position that they had vacant. So they're taking that funding, instead of just holding it there and not doing anything with it, they are putting it towards a much needed secretary salary. They did try to fill the coach and it didn't happen. The next few are corrections of accounts. The 580 account should have really been the transportation account 510 account. The next 580 should have really been a 730. So these are more budget corrections. Norwalk High, the next one was an instructional supply account, should have been an extracurricular activity account. And then going down to the next one, the 75,814, this is to shift funds from the Dean of Students account to a math teacher salary account. And this was at Nathan Hale. And after the master teacher schedule was completed, they determined that an additional math teacher was needed and would be hired in place of the dean of students role that was vacant. So that was that. The next one for 29,000, it was just a correction of an object code in the budget. The office assistant should have been a 121, not a 122. So that's mirror accounting. The next one is to shift funds to increase a para from a 27.5-hour position to a 35-hour position due to the bumping process. So HR, due to administrative reasons, funded that from the intern account, which was considered not needed at that point.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, Kristen.
Sure.
I think the board has reviewed this and we have to vote to approve these transfers, and Sherelle needs to go to the focus group at Columbus. So I'd like, if possible, to ask the committee if they have any further questions and move to a vote to approve. I apologize to interrupt.
No worries.
Okay, so can I have a motion to approve these budget transfers as they stand and send them to the full board?
Moved.
Second.
Colin, Sherelle, all in favor? Aye.
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 And Diana is not here because she left, so that is unanimous. Okay, Kristen, we can continue the explanation. I just wanted to release Sherelle and thank her so much for being here tonight, and good luck with the focus group.
Thanks,
Thank you
Sherelle.
so much, Barbara. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
We'll see
Take
you
care, dear.
tomorrow.
Sherelle.
Bye-bye.
Okay. So please go ahead, Kristen. I apologize.
Sure, no worries.
Wanted to get the procedural out of the way.
Definitely. So the electricity account, that's just moving it to the correct project code, which is the general facilities code. The next one is the 04 project code shouldn't have been used because that was a prior location. Same thing, just moving the natural gas money to facilities project code. And then finally, a correction on the object code for EFS state reporting purposes. It should be a 412 code. So that was more of an accounting adjustment as well.
So with all of these accounting adjustments, are we, sort of fixing that in perpetuity going forward so that that won't occur next year and you don't have to do these same cleanups in the next cycle?
Right. Yeah. And some of it's new information due to us being more particular and detail oriented because of EFS. So maybe we had done it like this in the past, and now just getting through the EFS report, which is a lot of detail, and the more detail you provide to the state, the better the reporting will be statewide. We felt that we should just drill down and, take care of that. It's not that you couldn't report it in the 400, but the 412 might be a better option.
No, and I really appreciate that because those that data really helps the board compare how we are doing in terms of efficiency of spending with other districts. So I appreciate your dedication to the accuracy. Thank you. Okay, Colin, you have any questions?
No, thanks for the thorough explanations.
Just a few budget transfers.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all in the secret sauce. Okay. So we'll move on to the financial report. And, my takeaway from reviewing this is that we're going to have some challenges in the next 2 years in looking at, benchmarking our funding against the past and against the future, because we have all these extra unusual expenditures and extra unusual funding sources. So I am wondering, there's really probably no way to do this, but I'd be tempted to add some sort of column that reflected, if we were very much out of sync with past year, a column that reflected how much of it was COVID related or something. I don't know. We haven't really talked about this, but something to think about because it'll be hard for us to monitor our expenditures comfortably and reliably.
I see what you're saying. And I think over the next few months, we have to see how it shakes out. Part of it is we may have to do some journal entries or transfers out of these accounts into the coronavirus relief funds or the Esser Grant funds. So that may take some of the cleanup there. But You're right. Some of it may be in areas like supplies that we may not typically spend in. But I think after December 30th, some of it will be cleaned up due to moving it out to those grants.
Good. I think that will help a lot. You know, with the change in leadership, it's so important that we are stable in our accounting practices and can show stability, and that we're not having volatility in our budgeting. So I think it would be worth the effort to try and get that done, you know, before we head into December and January, if possible.
Yeah, I think, you know, most of the expense that we're incurring that's related to COVID should be out of the general fund. It's just a matter of things that have sort of temporarily landed there, that if we can get those journal entries off to the correct places, if we've got, you know, the COVID grant, the Esser grant, and the carryover funding, all of those are, you know, outside of our general fund. So that'll be important to make sure that those things get coded correctly to the correct grant fund. And then we're going to show, you know, this influx of grant revenue and grant expenditures, and there's no way around that because that's real, but that'll at least be in the grants fund as opposed to the local fund. And certainly the city's focus, it tends to be on the local fund, since that's what's being paid for by local taxpayers.
Exactly. Okay, great.
And some of that can happen after carryover is officially approved and the grant applications are officially approved. So as soon as that happens in the next few weeks or the next month, then we could start to, you know, clean everything up.
That's great. And that then we can sort of assess if we are running high or low in any particular area. It's just really hard to see right now because it's all sort of together. Okay. All right. So Tom, are you walking us through this?
Kristen's going to walk you through this. I think you've done a little review, Kristen. Is that right?
I do. So on a full year basis, 3 months have passed, or 25%. On a school year basis, about 10% or so has passed, or 1,000%, depending on what terms you're looking at. So there's not much to report on the first few pages, but if you go to page 3, there's a few things that look a little funny, and part of it's timing.
Which page 3, this one?
Page 3, yep, with longevity. So part of it's timing. As you can see, longevity is showing a year-to-date actuals with a credit. And part of that is, I just pulled the financials today. This is as of the end of September. During October, all the longevity, or 99% of it, was processed. So that looks funny, and that's just the timing of when the entries were posted and the payouts happen. So next month, you'll totally see that corrected. As of right now, we have not paid any unemployment bills because, as you know, there's a lag on that. So in the next probably 2 months, something will show up there. We don't know yet. The 301 account, attendance at meetings, I just wanted to make a comment there that people are doing alternatives on that, and they are going to use that money. It's just going to be used virtually instead of, you know, attending certain PD or conferences. The 323 line represents our kids in crisis social work. We just haven't paid the bill on that particularly yet at this point in time. We have field trip money. That's a lot lower than it typically is for obvious reasons. The bulk of that is CGS, and they're going to be doing alternative type field trips. So they will spend that at a lower rate. If you want to turn to page 4, just pointing out things that look funny, but a lot of it is cleanup and timing because of, you know, the reopening of school and people not processing or not things shifting between grants. So the 410 account looks like barely anything's been processed, but now at this point in time, I just checked it today and people have encumbered for the year. So that should show some cleanup next year. On the bottom, the 450 account, same thing. It's showing as a negative. I just checked that today, and in the October numbers, all the encumbrances are done. So that should self-correct next month. Page 5, things look a little low there, some of the pieces, but same thing. The timing of the encumbrances just happened this month. So that should self-correct. And honestly, There's still a sliver of COVID in on page 8 right at the end, but that's part of our journal entries once all of the grants are approved. But to your point, Barbara, there's we have to wait for the next month or two and other things to shake out, and then we can put things in the right places.
Colin, do you have any questions? So can you talk a little bit about long-term subs? Because I thought I saw that that was up a bit. Are we employing a different strategy? Obviously, I know there are extenuating circumstances, but are we budgeted appropriately there given what we're experiencing in this first month of school?
I think I'll let Kristen jump in, but I think we are experiencing increased expenses in the long-term sub category compared to prior years because of COVID and the number of people who've taken some sort of leave that they may be eligible to take. Now, many of those leaves may be unpaid leaves, and to the extent it's an unpaid leave, it's actually less expensive to generally to have a long-term sub than a regular teacher in there.
Correct.
So I would expect we will have some savings in our teacher regular wage account, the 117 account, that we will probably need to transfer over to the long-term sub line item to cover some of those expenses there. I don't have any actual projections on that yet. I don't know whether, Kristen, you've got any projections or anything else to add. I'm thinking we probably don't have those yet.
One thing is we did put the estimate of the COVID related paid FMLA that people were taking. We did in the coverage for the subs, we did put that in the grant. So if that gets approved, we do have a sliver of that in related to what we knew at that point in time. So if they approve it as such, then a portion will be covered.
That's great. And did I see just something with electrical popped out at me, but I can't quite recall what I had picked out. Are we seeing with the increased use of devices and the Wi-Fi and so forth, any uptick there that we should be prepared for?
I suspect, but I haven't had a chance to look at that yet. I don't know whether, Kristen, you've looked at that.
I haven't dug deep into that.
22 account, I think it is. Yeah.
So maybe for next month, we could just look at how the change in our model is affecting our utilities.
Right.
And
yeah.
just
We have the air
out.
purifier. We've got 1,000 air purifiers running.
Right.
In the district, and those obviously were not previously, in use. So there'll be electricity associated with that. Plus, as you mentioned, all the devices as well. So I expect we will see some impact on electricity. Now, in the grand scheme of the entire district budget, it's probably not going to be, that material, but I do think there will be some impact there.
We need to look at it. Okay. All right. So I'm grateful for the walkthrough. Thank you very much. And I think that brings us to the end of our agenda, and we did not receive any public comments to be read into the record. So I think with that, unless Colin, you have any more questions, I think we can move to adjourn. And that would
adjourn.
Okay, I second, since I'm the last chicken here. Thank you very much for your time this evening, and Yvette, especially to you. Thanks for taking the time at short notice to walk us through.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good
night.
night.